SDL. And all the stuff that we went through and all the hell that we went through to go and do that. Because, like, SDL didn't come from nowhere. We released XP, we were all proud of our little baby. And then a month and a half later, a vulnerability came up, I think in UDDI or something, I can't remember exactly what it was. But that was a really sort of shocking thing for us, that immediately this thing's been compromised. Admittedly, it wasn't a protocol no one cared about, but we won't go into that. And so, this is the continuation. I believe for Microsoft, it's at least another 5 years before we can go and say, out of the box, every system that we go and do, we're not going to be worried about for the first 6 months what sort of vulnerabilities come up. I believe that. We're going to see what happens. Also, the industry is changing pretty radically. The models where, you go and say there are cloud services interacting with in-premise services is going to probably make a sort of change the sort of attack vectors that people go and have with their systems. So I'm going to talk about Windows Server Core, then I'll talk about, I think, what we've got left to do, and then I'll get out of your way by about 4:05, I promise. There you go. Hands up if you've heard of Windows Server Core. Okay. So I know at least about 40% of the room are awake. The other 60%, I think, are either asleep or they haven't heard of Windows Server Core. Windows Server Core really came from our realization a couple of years ago that we had customers that were in production that had to do things like cycle their servers because of a vulnerability that came up on Media Player. Media Player, great piece of software, but unfortunately there were vulnerabilities that came up a couple of years ago and they weren't really a valid case for a server piece of software. So we started looking at the dependencies in different parts of the system and removing things out of different parts of the system and going and saying, well, why do we need to have a shell there? Why do we need to have anything there? Why do we need to have any of the administration tools installed by default? How small can we make this system? What are the other things that come along? So as an installation option on Windows Server 2008, you get the choice of being able to install either Server Core or Full Server. And Server Core, after you go through the install and you sign in, you're going to see a command prompt. It's taken it back to the 70s, there are no extra binaries loaded on that system unless they're needed. And really that's sort of the core thing. If you want to go and install a DNS server in there, you've got to go and run the command prompt to be able to go and do that. Now, after that, it's going to be plumbed so you can go and do centralized management of that. No management of that thing is going to be done locally on the system. Because, I figure that most servers are running in a darkened room and the administrator guy's sitting either half a continent away or a couple of hallways away, and they don't really need to be able to go and do anything local on that system. So there's no local admin tools, and all administration is done remotely. Now, we have in Windows Server 2008, we have integrated PowerShell. For any Windows administrator, I would suggest to you that you check out PowerShell because it's going to change your life. And I'm kind of serious there. Obviously, there's the other question of what are the attack vectors that come up from installing such a powerful scripting engine in the base level of the server. But, on Server Core, you can run anything that's a non-managed code script. So IIS, all the IIS, we have a version of that runs on Server Core. All the things that run in there are just WMI scripts, and they are a lowered attack surface. The big reasons that we had, as I said before, is to reduce the attack surface and really be able to sort of nullify the possibility that a vulnerability in some piece of software that frankly we don't care about on the server could be installed later. Now, having said that, on the server we do the same thing. On the full server where you have the UI, we do the same thing. There are some times where you might want to have some more desktop things. If you've got say a terminal server case, you want to be able to go and provide more of a desktop experience there. We have this extra thing you can install, the Desktop Experience Pack, which brings a bunch more of those, more clienty sort of things in there. And so you get people like me who run server on my laptop. I've got all that extra stuff installed in there as well. There's a limited number of roles that get installed on Server Core. Mainly because of dependencies. You know, the hard thing when you're running any piece of software, any software project is working out what your dependencies, keeping track of it. Frankly, my suggestion to anybody starting up a software project, always be aware of your dependencies, always be aware of the things that are going to affect your build every day, the things that are going to stop you be able to go and change one piece of software because something underneath it's going to do. And we have a set of roles that will run on that. They all have to be installed by default, all the way from, you know, basic things like file and print, Active Directory, all the way to virtualization. Now, there are some optional components that can be installed in this because sometimes you want to go and get some of the extra stuff. For example, clustering. You know, people want to be able to go and set up their systems clustered depending on what the role is there, and they want to be able to go and do it. Or things like multipath I/O or BitLocker. And the sort of case where BitLocker gets interesting is that, you know, we've got customers. Actually, I spoke to this bank a couple of weeks ago who told me that in the last year they've lost 3 servers from branches, which is kind of the most astounding thing I've ever heard. If you're going to rob a bank, you may as well steal the money, not the server. But people have been stealing the servers from this one bank. And, you know, if they go and do a snatch and grab on the hardware, where BitLocker's turned on, in this case, if this is the server that's running in-premise in the branch, it's a brick. It's nothing that's useful, or the drives are nothing that's useful, and the drives are the most interesting place to hold things. We've also got a base set of functions that are turned on. You know, as I kept on saying, we're going to do the outer protection. We're going to have the firewall. Now, the cool thing is, as well, that we go and do things like the management systems that we have, things like System Center, to be able to go and provide management of a whole bunch of machines together, can actually manage that firewall centrally. So they can go and change a setting across all the firewalls of systems if they want to go and do that. I'm always suggesting to customers that are looking at that sort of stuff to tread lightly. Personally, I actually believe that within about 4 or 5 years, the predominant production version of Windows Server is going to be the server core version or installation option. I believe that's going to be a flip that happens within 5 years, because it's kind of a no-brainer. It looks exactly the same, it looks, smells, tastes exactly the same as every other server that you might have in production. It's just got a smaller attack surface, and you got to worry about less things. So, and, you know, we will, if my bribery, especially tonight, actually happens with MSRC, you know, we will name that that when we're releasing an announcement of a vulnerability, we'll say it's not valid for server core systems. So, you know, a year's time, hopefully we can come back and say there isn't anything there. I don't think I want to be the person who actually ever promised that, but that's definitely one of the sort of focus areas that we want to be able to go and do. So, in my last 5 minutes, what do we got to go and do between now and the release of the thing? We have a bunch of people running in production. We work with a bunch of customers who do part of a thing called the Technology Adoption Program, who run systems in production before we release. We also do that with the Microsoft infrastructure. The Microsoft infrastructure is pretty interesting. The other customers' infrastructure to me is actually the most interesting, because, you know, we can kind of get our guys to do what we say, but they're going to have to see, the customer's going to have to see some real value that's going in there. All of Microsoft.com, if you go up to Netcraft and have a look at www.microsoft.com, you'll see that it's all running on Windows Server 2008 and IS7 today. There are around 3,000 sites, maybe a bit less, maybe a bit more, running in production on the net today. That's actually from the Netcraft statement that they made at the end of June was about 2,800. We think it's a little higher now. So I'm lowballing with 3,000. Don't hold me to it. Netcraft are the people that make the real statements of the number of things. And we're continuing on. And we've got a pretty known end game that we do for server. Windows Server 2003, I believe, was the model for us to go and learn how to do an end game of a product. You know, some of the parts of that system. IS6 has had, I think, 2 moderate vulnerabilities since its release. It's had one, SMTP and ASP.NET. Yeah, It's turned off, but there are some moderate vulnerabilities that have come up that were turned off by default, but, that could be valid on there. But really, IIS has had no vulnerabilities in the 4 years since we've released IIS 6. So we really think we've made a lot of ground there, and we've made a lot of ground, especially compared to the previous version. And we continue to do that, and we continue to model off the things that we have done successfully in the past. We do have another round of pen tests. We have another set of things. We have a continuing set of things. Chris is sitting there, and he knows how much I love writing checks for him to go and do things. But we have a continuation of a bunch of stuff that's going on. So far, we've seen that, the web server, file print, network protection, or what we call NAP, which is, the protection service or the policy enforcement service, and terminal server. They're the ones that have been most installed in our betas, and we've had a bunch of stuff going on. We've got thousands of servers sitting out there in production. We're trying to find ways. We're working with our customers to find out when every time one of them burps or farts, what it does and what's going on. And that's a sort of continuation of our process to be able to go and find things out. The final thing I'll actually talk about is we believe that the world has got to move to 64-bit computing. Okay, not just because of things like, lower level protection of the system to be able to go and say that you're not going to go and randomly have some way of someone putting something on a system that you have no way of being able to turn off. But, we really think that we're seeing a lot of people who are running x86 on x64 systems, which I think is akin to running a sort of, having a V8 car and only having 4 cylinders running. We're really working on that. If any of you guys are driver vendors making software on top of that, there are a lot more reasons that we have for you to be able to go and move to, and so, if you're at WinEck, you understand this. There are a lot more reasons that we have for you to be able to go and move up to the x64 or 64-bit platforms, and we'll continue to do a huge investment. In fact, this is the last release we do of a 32-bit server operating system. I got misquoted a couple of months ago. It made huge press. Well, I didn't really make huge press. It made press in like 2 or 3 places that were a little bit better than blogs, but this was the last 32-bit operating system all the way across. I speak for server, not for client. But on the server side, we've announced in 2005, this release is our last 32-bit one. It's all 64-bit from here on, which means that we'll do both x64 and IA64 continuing out there. We know that people are running x64 in production. The numbers are lower than we'd like, which is kind of weird because you can't buy an x86 server anymore. So, we want everybody to go and run at that. All right, I'm over. David LeBlanc is going to come up and talk next. My name's Ian McDonald. My email address is ian.mcdonald@Microsoft. If you want to send me questions, I'm quite happy to answer them. I may copy in one of our security folks if it's relevant or whatever. Check out our system. Try and bust it. I'd be real interested to hear if you busted us. Thanks very much.